Did.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Digital Law podcast produced by Anson Evaluate. So this podcast is going to be a slightly different podcast to our kind of standard news update. So we are going to be interviewing our managing director, Peter Wright. So I will pass over to Peter Wright to introduce himself, and then we will get started.
Thank you, Amelia. So my name's Peter. I'm the Managing Director and a solicitor at Digital Law. And we thought, be interested, perhaps interesting, I hope it is, to go a little bit more into how and why I'm the Managing Director at Digital Law. So I'll pass back to Amelia.
Thanks, Peter. So just kind of giving a bit of background here. Myself and Peter, we have been going to more networking events since now we're in that post-COVID era. We are able to see people in person again. And when myself and Peter were in a networking event last week, I found that I was learning kind of new things about Peter, with every conversation that you had. And so I thought, it'd be very interesting to hear other points of view and to kind of understand more about you. So we decided to come up with this interview. And so that leads me very nicely into my first question. So, Peter, what made you want to become a solicitor?
Thanks, Amelia, and indeed for the listeners. So yes, this is entirely Amelia's fault, but here we go. So in terms of what made me want to become a solicitor, I had to actually think about this answer quite carefully because I'm having to go back the best part of 20 years, sadly. But I think why I became a solicitor, and certainly why I ended up putting down law on the university application UCAS form. So I think, why do I want to do law rather than history or English or something else? Because I always enjoyed writing. I always enjoyed a lot of the research that you do around history. So either English or history was probably a better fit. But the reason why I ended up going for law was that I'd always had this thing about wanting to understand why things are the way they are. And when it comes down to it, the answer to the majority of those questions, why is that building built there? Why has the government made that decision to do X, Y, Z? It always comes down to law. What can you or can't you do? Either statutes, precedent, case law, and not just at a national level, but obviously supranational. And it kind of all sort of coalesced together into thinking, well, studying law means I'll get to learn all the answers. 20 years later, I'm still learning the answers.
And it's all well and good learning the answers until the answers change on a semi-regular basis.
In this field, definitely. There's certain areas of law where it's a little bit more static, but with this, it changes on a very regular basis. So a huge amount of our work now is always updating what we thought may have been a clear position 2 or 3 years ago. This has now changed totally beyond recognition in certain fields, and that happens all the time.
So what has been your favourite experience within the legal sector? What do you think has stood out most to you?
Well, the thing I enjoy the most now is training, the young lawyers in the firm, so apprentice solicitors such as yourselves, and also when I get the opportunity through the European Law Students Association to go and speak at their law school program. So in a few weeks' time, I'm going to Prague to speak at a winter law school that ELSA is putting on there. And there are law students from all over Europe and further afield. In one year, there were people there from Thailand, young lawyers who are just eager to learn about a particular area. Last year, it was on cryptocurrency and cybersecurity. I'm talking about cybersecurity again in a few weeks' time. And it's great getting perspectives from lawyers in other jurisdictions saying, well, this is what it's like to train there. These are the issues in our area. And one of the things I enjoyed the most in that regard actually was going out to Ukraine a few years ago and speaking at an ELSA event there, and being able to speak to them about law and technology. Sadly, of course, things have all changed a lot in Ukraine, but I'm still in touch with a lot of the people that I met there, it gives you a perspective that you would not otherwise have. So I'd say that's been one of my the favourite things I've been able to pick up, particularly in recent years.
So, leading on very nicely from this, what would you say your biggest achievement has been?
Well, this was an interesting one because I thought, well, how to really approach that, and it's probably the answer is setting up and running digital law, because it's the not what I'd originally, when you're sort of particularly studying law and as a newly qualified solicitor, it is not in a million years what I thought I would be doing, and I'll explain why later. But the point is that then getting that up and running, and now almost 10 years later, a thriving law firm, is quite special in that regard. So I suppose that really would be the biggest achievement. I mean, I was very proud to be chair of what's now the Technology and Law Committee at the Law Society of England and Wales. I was very proud to be chair of the trainee solicitors group, but that was back in 2005 now, and the world is a very, very different place from what it was in 2005. So I've done lots of things with the Law Society of England and Wales, and the European Young Bar Association, but I think the stuff that I'm now doing with digital law is probably the biggest achievement, really.
That very nicely leads us on to my next question. So, what made you start your own law firm? Because you've spoken there about kind of when you were essentially in my position, when you were learning about the law, you never foresaw yourself as starting your own law firm. So, what changed your mind there?
Several things. First of all, I think it was going out to the United States, and my uh, girlfriend, now wife, ran her own firm in Arizona, and seeing how that worked, and um, the fact it was a totally different experience from just being in private practice in a firm, which is what I'd been doing up to that point, usually working in much bigger firms. The firm where I trained was 30 odd, well, probably no, 20 odd partners. And then I'd worked in bigger national firms. And, it's the fact that then seeing that actually, no, this could be very, very different, sort of sparked the interest. And then when the opportunity subsequently came around, that's why I ended up sort of starting a firm. So that was one part of it, was that sort of started off the germ, the interest. And I wouldn't be doing any of this were it not for Heather, who also works, is a US qualified attorney, works a digital law too. So wouldn't be doing it without Heather. But the other thing was that I found that within big firms, and I'm not going to mention them directly, but take a look on my LinkedIn for those that are connected. If you aren't connected to me on LinkedIn, there's the incentive. I found that they were very restrictive in terms of their approach to the practice of law. So I was doing a lot of work on data protection advice for a fairly major client in the late 2000s, so 2009, 2010, 2011, and I could see that was the way that things were going in terms of the development of social media, mobile device use, the fact that everyone was sharing more and more information online, and this was going to be the future of commerce, buying and selling goods and services online. Well, this is something that really people are going to need legal advice on. If you're selling your goods and services in different countries, or you're selling your products, or you're putting videos up, or you're putting audio up, or you're using social media, if you're needing to know what to do from an information data perspective, from a security perspective, you're going to need advice on that. And there's a heavy legal aspect to it. And the partners at the firms where I worked, when I sort of talked about this, that we need to sort of, I perhaps set up a team doing this, and there could be a real need for it, and I've already, delivered advice on X, Y, Z, and they just were not interested. Indeed, as I was sort of having discussions around, what would you have to do? What hoops do you have to jump through to progress at some of these firms? one of the partners one evening sort of leans back in his office chair and sort of looks at me and says, if you were wanting to be a partner at a firm like this, you have to remember that even if you get up to the exalted level that I'm at, and he was like, running a big team in a department, but there were multiple offices around the world, all these big clients. Yeah, great. But he was almost sort of saying, even if you get to his exalted position, he was saying, you don't actually have an awful lot of control. There's always someone else having to think about what they're wanting to do in different departments, teams within the firm. And you suddenly realize that these things are like a layer cake. And you're never going to be able to do things the way that you want to. And already I was sort of chafing at the bit, feeling that I was not able to develop services in this exciting area of law in the way that I was thinking I wanted to. I'm starting to think about, we could do these things for fixed fees. We could chase after new clients. We could do this. We could do that. Wouldn't this be exciting? And forever having to sort of run up against a brick wall of the word no was getting somewhat frustrating. So that was a big reason to think, well, you know what? Fine, let's go and do this differently. Let's set this up and do it from scratch. So that was sort of the other big motivating factor.
So you've sort of already answered my next question, but why digital law? Because, if you're starting your own firm, you've just spoken there about the amount of freedom that you'd have. What kind of reeled you into the digital sector and focusing on e-commerce?
No one else was running a firm that just did that I could see. And this was in 2013 when I was sort of laying the foundations and jumping through the hoops of what used to be called SRA authorization, which involved submitting several lever arch files full of information to the regulator, and then they would look and carefully consider all of the things that you said, and then they would give you the yes or the no in terms of, yes, you can start. That was all swept away and streamlined afterwards, so that was a useful exercise. But the point is that in 2013, when I was doing all of that, yes, there were firms doing data and digital and IT, but that would be amongst doing loads of other things. Very often the people doing it would be doing something else, litigation or commercial work or contract or whatever in their spare time and their other time. And it was almost like data and digital was just a nice to have, a sort of, and I do this as a side hustle, if there's anything out there. Otherwise, I'm doing the other thing that earns the fees and keeps the wheel going. So, they were not really invested in the idea of doing advice around digital in the way that I was thinking there was an option to do it. So that again was the sort of thinking to do it, and in terms of that's why it became digital. And the name of the firm kind of came from there used to be an advertising campaign about I think it was a type of creosote, and it was sort of, it does what it says on the tin. Cooper's creosote, it's creosote, it's by Cooper's creosote. And it was almost like, okay, well, fine, what do we want to do? Digital law. What are we going to call the firm? Digital law. So you get so many people who start a law firm and it's their name, and I just felt that Peter Wright Law Co. would be fairly dull and tedious. So I just thought, I'm not really going down that route. This is something else. And plus it's not just me, it's going to be the people that end up joining and running the firm too. And almost 10 years later, that's kind of where we are. So I never wanted it just to be my name above the shop. It was something much more than that.
So what challenges did you face when setting up? You've mentioned there about the massive lever arch files, but what other things did you have to go through in order to set up the law firm?
How long have you got? Because what starts off is, this is a great, exciting idea, and then you just get bogged down in this minutiae. So there's the SRA. There was insurance, getting into the wonderful world of professional indemnity insurance. And if you think getting your car insured is a nightmare, welcome to the world of professional indemnity insurance, which every year is an unadulterated joy. But doing that for the first time and then working out where you're going to get the money from to pay for that premium when you have precisely 0 clients is novel. So there's that. There's then, where are we going to trade from? It was never going to be a sort of starting up from the kitchen table. We wanted to be in a office where everything would be secure from a sort of security perspective, IT perspective. Yet, you know, you go to some of these shared office environments, oh, you could have a hot desk, and you're like, yeah, you can't do that for legal services. People could hear the phone calls, or people could see your screen, and all this stuff. So, finding somewhere with four walls and a roof and a locked door and an alarm was one of the first things we had to do, and managed to do that. And then it's been recruiting, getting the right people, and you sort of learn by process and experience. You know, the things to, you know, to recruit the right people for the right roles, and that's taken us a little while to get there. And then, you know, we wanted to always do things like offering, you know, doing all of the work on a basis of fixed fees, and gradually we've developed that to now a lot of the work we do on subscriptions. But I never wanted to be in the business of having lawyers sat there spending all their time worried about recording time and recording chargeable hours. So I'd say one of the big challenges was saying, right, we're going to do all this on the basis of fixed fees, and working with the clients to get the right fixed fees and making sure that we're delivering the right services. Because instead, I want the focus to be you're delivering the service in terms of what the client needs. You are not thinking about a little wheel in the background, like in a cab, watching the time go round and round and round, because it's stressful for the clients. It's surprisingly stressful for the fee earners as well. And I didn't want that to get in the way. So having attended a seminar 20 years ago called The Tyranny of the Billable Hour, I was quite convinced that I didn't want to have that within the firm, and we've managed to avoid that as a result, because I think it's thoroughly counterproductive. But that was still a challenge to have that, and therefore to go on a totally different cash-based accounting system, and finding an accountant that would work with us on that, and understand how we were operating, was all sort of part of the challenge as well. So that's been, those were, I'd say, the big hurdles initially to be able to jump over.
So you've spoken about kind of the initial things and glossed over what digital law does as a firm, but what does your day-to-day work life look like? What do you get? What was your typical day in the office looking like?
Well, it's where do you want to start, really? I mean, you know, one of the things I do is a matter of having the right level of focus. So I'm sort of metronomically always up at 6 a.m. and I work out first to sort of get that out of the way, so I can then just focus the tunnel vision during the day on that. I'm not thinking about, oh, I need to get out and then get to the gym at 5:30 or 6 o'clock. Like, just then focus on what needs to be done. So then it's a sort of matter of, you know, working closely with the team, and obviously we've got some people in the office, we've got some people who are consultants, paralegals working in different locations. So we use a lot of technology to do that through our case management system, through instant messaging, but still needing to make sure that everyone's on the same page, working in the right direction, working towards the right goal, looking after the clients. So that's a large part of it. Another large part is staying on top of exactly what's happening in a field that, you know, evolves very quickly. So it's sometimes not just a matter of looking at the usual legal journals that a lawyer would look at, but I'm looking at tech journals and trying to understand developments, both at a UK, increasingly at an EU level, and in different countries around the world. So I mean, there's a lot of things that happen in some of the US states, in particular California, or some of the discussions that are happening at a federal level in Congress that will have a big impact on some of the platforms we use and the laws that apply to those platforms in the UK and in Europe. So it's always a matter of looking sort of at multiple different levels. And we do quite a bit of advice for our clients on sort of trying to look ahead in terms of what challenges look like. So you have to have that sort of perspective. And then also we sometimes do some consulting calls with organizations that might be investors that have you know, an interest in the performance of different platforms and want to sort of get that view in terms of, well, what's coming down the line and what will the impact of that be on certain platforms and how will they operate. So it's really important to have that sort of perspective. So a lot of my time is sort of spent on that. And then overall, a large part of it is looking after our clients, and that means not just necessarily being in our office in the digital media center, but sometimes going out seeing the clients, spending some time with them in person. So we are, quite a few of our clients are London based. So we'll every now and then, sort of every 5 or 6 weeks, we go down to London, spend a few days down there, sort of catching up. Even if it's just either an in-person meeting or an in-person coffee, I think is still important, even in the age of our video conferencing and technology, to have that connection. So that people know that they can just turn around and ask something. And again, they're not worried about a clock running in the background and we just want them to have that dialogue so that we can make sure that they're getting all the support they need, but also that if it's helpful to discuss any other things in the round, they can do so.
So my final question to you would be, what would your advice to your younger self or someone just starting their journey to becoming a legal professional, what advice would you give them?
That's a good question. I think if it was to me, I got so thoroughly bored on the training and qualification process, and at certain points, quite seriously disillusioned. Actually, I think it would have been to say properly focus on the things that interest you. Don't worry about the boring stuff. At a certain point, you'll be able to sort of wave goodbye to the boring, tedious stuff. And indeed some of the boring, tedious people that were involved in it at certain times, and actually then focus on the interesting stuff, the exciting stuff. I really struggle to be able to sort of focus my attention on stuff that I don't enjoy. I'm actually on the autism spectrum, which I only worked out in the last couple of years. So stuff that doesn't interest me, I find it very difficult to focus on, very difficult to latch on. But if it is something I focus on, then that becomes sort of all encompassing, and I can focus on it for hours and hours at a time to the exclusion of everything else. So that's where sort of autism becomes the superpower. So it's nice to know. It would have been nice to know that I had that sort of 20 years ago, but then to know that it is going to be possible to focus on the exciting stuff would have been good to know. And I think the other thing which I learned eventually in the nick of time was to say, make sure you don't get pigeonholed, and that would be any advice to any young lawyers out there. Particularly at the point where you are qualified, you may find, depending on the firm you are with, they may try and pigeonhole you into a really specific type of litigation or a really specific type of very dry corporate law. And then you might find within a year or two that you suddenly are so specialized that your career is now set on that path. And if you're not careful, you can't then sort of change to something else. So if you are suddenly finding yourself you've accepted a particular specialism because that's your job and it's paying the bills, but you don't want to do that for the next 30 years, that can be a problem. So make sure you've got that perspective to think, well, what do I want to do with my career? And don't allow yourself to get pigeonholed and railroaded into something that you really don't want to do. It's your career. It's your life. You do not want to find yourself at a certain point going, oh, I wish I'd done something else. Do what you want to do, not what other people want you to do. And I think the final bit, which again I sort of learned, and it's perhaps sometimes it's the sort of thing you have to learn. Don't allow yourself to sort of be seduced by the glamorous image of what practicing in law is going to be like. It's not like Suits. It's not like Boston Legal and all this, and the atmosphere of being in a big firm. And now I suppose that it's a matter of, you might look at websites or see stuff that's shared on Instagram or TikTok or whatever and think, oh, this is what the life of being a lawyer in a big firm's like. When I was qualifying, these big firms would, the Magic Circle firms, they'd leave glossy brochures in the law school. So you could go along and get this incredibly glossy brochure with pictures of aircraft on it and airports and people with wheeled cases going to meetings. That looks exciting. Before now you see it on The Apprentice and think, no, it looks incredibly boring and tedious. But that sort of builds up this image and you think, oh, that's what the practice of law is going to be like. Well, guess what? It isn't. And for those that are doing it, I did it for a period, and then the other people that I know who are doing it actually found it incredibly boring and tedious. And so I'd say don't allow what looks like that image to sort of draw you in. And I found that quite instructive, Amelia. I was talking to Laura, one of our colleagues the other day, and thankfully she's managed to work that one out from speaking to other lawyers without feeling the need to go and do it herself. So, she's clearly smarter than I am, because I did go and do that for a few years before realizing it was not really what I wanted to do. But I'd say, yeah, to any young lawyer out there, be careful of the sort of the images that are out there, and don't let those necessarily drive the early decisions that you make in terms of sort of moving on and developing your career. But ultimately, I'd say, yeah, do it, do stuff that you like. And I'd say also the final thing is you have, as a solicitor, an incredibly flexible qualification. So once you're qualified, you don't have to stay in private practice if that's how you're qualified and you find that you don't like it. You can go in-house. About a third of the people who are qualified as solicitors now work in-house, and that proportion is growing. Guess what? You're in-house. You're not recording time. You're focused on one client, a very different sort of job, and you can do very well for yourself as sort of, in-house legal counsel, senior legal counsel in these sorts of places. Seat on the board. Very often then, once you're the lawyer on the board, you become the CEO because you're the only person who actually understands what's going on in all the discussions. So it's an incredibly flexible qualification. Look at some of the big successful companies out there, and very often it's the people who are running it are, the lawyers who started out as the in-house lawyer who have then progressed through and are now that chairperson or chief executive. And it allows you to do that. And even if you're not interested in that, you can move through. It could be that you want to become a judge. It could be that you want to use that qualification in different ways, become a company secretary, do loads of those things. So just because you've got it opens up all of these different avenues. And I'd say really utilize that. You worked hard to get it, but I think sometimes people, after they've done like 2 or 3 years in practice, think I just don't enjoy this. And it's almost like they just think, I've burnt out, I worked so hard, I'm now doing this, I'm thoroughly disillusioned, I don't want to do it anymore, and just sort of, think that's not for me, and then move into something totally different. And I'd say, well, if you want to go to something where you're going to be happy, then absolutely do that. But I'd say that you might find that the happy, rewarding career that you're looking for is still as a solicitor. It's just either in a different firm or outside of private practice or wherever you have currently trained. And use that flexibility. I'd say it's the most flexible qualification in the world for that. So having worked so hard to get it, use it.
Thanks, Peter. I hope our listeners have found this interesting, meeting obviously the managing director and learning a little bit more about what it takes to be a legal professional and our day-to-day life. So thank you again for kind of explaining what you do, Peter. And thank you as well to Answer and Evaluate for helping to produce this webinar. And we will be back next week, potentially with some news or another more interesting podcast where potentially we might be able to meet one of the apprentice solicitors working at Digital Law. So I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you again soon.